Assalamualaikum, hello everyone, hope you all are doing well. Today I am here with another lecture of economics. Firstly, let's recall the general overview of economics. Economics is the social science that is concerned with production, distribution and consumption of goods and services. And you all know that goods and services are all those things which we can utilize to fulfill our basic needs. Today our topic is gross domestic product GDP. All those people who had already listened my previous lecture then surely have an idea about that. GDP is the concept of national income and we discussed it in very detail. And so today our topic is gross domestic product GDP, and it is the market value of all goods and services produced during a year with the help of internal resources of the country. Different sectors of economy needs inputs to produce goods and services output. This output is also called gross domestic product, and it is the very important aspect of any country's economic growth. Now let's know about GDP growth rate. Whenever you learn about GDP, you must ensure that you have an idea about the concept of growth rate. The GDP growth rate compares the year-over-year or quarterly change in a country's economic output to measure how fast an economy is growing. Usually expressed as percentage, this measure is popular for economic policymakers because GDP growth is thought to be closely connected to key policy targets such as inflation and unemployment rates. If GDP growth rate accelerates, it may be a signal that the economy is overheating and the central bank may seek to raise interest rates. Conversely, central banks see a shrinking or negative GDP growth rate, for example recession, as a signal that rates should be lowered and that stimulus may be necessary. And recession is basically a period of temporary economic decline during which trade and industrial activity are reduced, generally identified by a fall in GDP in 2 successive quarters. And we all said that the country is in the depth of a recession. Okay, so what is the importance of GDP? Gross domestic product GDP is one of the most widely used measures of an economy's output or production. It is defined as the total value of goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period, monthly, quarterly or annually. GDP is an accurate indicator of the size of economy, and the GDP growth is probably the single best indicator of economic growth. While GDP per capita has a close correlation with the trend in living standards over time, GDP enables policymakers and central banks to judge whether the economy is contracting or expanding and promptly take necessary action. It also allows policymakers, economists and businesses to analyze the impact of variables such as monetary and fiscal policy, economic shocks and tax and spending plans.
The letters GDP are flung around often by the President, the Federal Reserve Board, journalists, and many others. They stand for Gross Domestic Product, which represents the overall market value of all the goods and services a country produces. In a way, it's like a price tag on a country's output, and it measures the size of the economy. The price is determined with the following formula: C plus G plus I plus NX equals GDP, where C is the nation's private consumption or consumer spending, G is the sum of government spending, I is the sum of businesses' capital spending, and NX is the nation's total net exports minus imports. GDP is an important number because it indicates whether a country's economy is growing and expanding or shrinking and contracting. It also gives important information about how the introduction of new products and services or the improvement of existing ones affect demand. This data helps to plan future product development and improvement. goods. It also helps a country to stack its economy up against others in the world and determine whether it's growing at a comparable rate. While it's not a perfect science, GDP can also be used to get an estimate of a country's standard of living. The idea is that as a country's goods and services become more valuable globally, and as the GDP rises, so does the standard of living for the citizens of the country, since they profit from creating and providing the products and services. For these reasons, GDP is one of the most common indicators used to gauge a country's economic health.
Okay, now let's know about why is GDP so important to economists and investors. Economist perspective. Annual GDP totals are frequently used to compare national economies by size. Policymakers, financial market participants, and business executives are more interested in changes in the GDP over time, which are reported as an annualized rate of growth or contraction. This makes it easier to compare annual and quarterly rates. The economists believe that a healthy economy is one that has growth in the range of 2% to 4%. The higher, the better. Actually, no. If the growth rate spikes over 4%, it is considered too high and the economy can potentially become overheated. This means there is too much money chasing too few real growth opportunities. A bubble in the value can be created. This happened just before the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. Home values become overheated and a bubble in value resulted. The GDP growth rate spiked over 4% during multiple quarters prior to the downturn in 2007. Investors' perspective, while GDP growth rate is a good predictor of a potential movement in stock prices, the data is not received in a timely fashion. It can take 2 months for the numbers to be generated and reported to the public, and then the numbers may be revised later. This makes the GDP growth rate a good explainer but not necessarily a good predictor of stock market movement. For some indication of investing value, look for a positive trend in the GDP growth rate. If the economy can be growing between 2% and 4% and other market pressures remain relatively normal, for example value of dollar, global competition, etc., then there is a good chance to stock market will likewise reflect a positive trend. Main points about economists and investors. Gross domestic product tracks the health of country's economy. Economists can use GDP to determine whether an economy is growing or experiencing a recession, and investors can use GDP to make investment decisions. A bad economy often means lower earnings and stock prices. Alright, so here are the two types of GDP, real and nominal GDP. These are the two types from which we can calculate the GDP. Real and nominal GDP are two different ways to measure the gross domestic product of a nation. Nominal GDP measures gross domestic product in current dollars, unadjusted for inflation. Real GDP sets a fixed currency value, thereby removing any distortion caused by inflation or deflation. Real GDP provides the most accurate representation of how a nation's economy is either contracting or expanding. Alright, so today we learned about the GDP, and whenever we discuss about the GDP, we also discuss the concept of growth rate and inflation rate. Okay, so today I have a question for you all. Everybody who listens me right now must have to answer this question. Whether you have a knowledge about economics or not, that's perfectly alright. What policy should we have to make to control inflation? मतलब कि हमें ऐसी कौन सी पॉलिसी बनानी चाहिए जिसकी वजह से हम महंगाई को कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं. जब भी हम कहते हैं कि महंगाई हो गई है, हर चीज़ की प्राइसेस ज़्यादा हो गई हैं, हर चीज़ के ऊपर टैक्सेस ज़्यादा हो गई हैं, तो जब भी हम कहते हैं महंगाई ज़्यादा हो गई है तो हम उसको कंट्रोल कर सकते हैं, कम नहीं कर सकते. महंगाई या तो कंट्रोल होती है या फिर बढ़ जाती है. तो अब हमें महंगाई को कंट्रोल करने के लिए कौन सी पॉलिसी बनानी चाहिए? In my upcoming lectures, I will definitely discuss it in detail and share my opinion with you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening the lecture. And everyone, please make sure that give the answer and share your precious thoughts and opinions with me. Thank you. Take care of yourself. Take care of everyone around you. Like the video, share it, and subscribe the channel if you want to know about the other topics and videos about economics. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.